Okay. Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak. Welcome to Johns Hopkins University Muslim Association Ramadan program. Okay, let me sit down. That might be better. Welcome to Johns Hopkins University Muslim Association Ramadan program. Inshallah, we are here offering a program in co-sponsorship with the Center for Religious and Spiritual Life, Johns Hopkins University Muslim Association, and a program in Islamic Studies. We are here today, inshallah, offering you programming that is spiritually enriching and uplifting during this month of Ramadan. And with that, I want to introduce our events co-chair for the Johns Hopkins University Muslim Association, Maheen Ibrahimi, who will introduce our speaker. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Ailya Vajid serves the University of Virginia community as Muslim chaplain. In this role, she supports the religious, spiritual, and broader meaning-making journeys of Muslim students, staff, and faculty, as well as others in the UVA community through weekly study circles, pastoral care, worship services, educational offerings, multi-faith dialogue, and advocacy. Previously, she served as Associate Chaplain for Muslim and Interfaith Life at Carleton and Macalester Colleges, Multi-Faith Advisor at Gustavus Adolphus College, and Muslim Student Advisor at Swarthmore College. Ailya is committed to connecting to the depths of our human selves and to seeing that humanity in each person as we engage across difference and through the challenges we face in the world. In her work, Ailya seeks to promote open, honest dialogue and interaction in both intrafaith and interfaith contexts. She is also committed to issues of mental health and counseling. In her spare time, Ailya enjoys spending time in nature, reading sacred and reflective texts, learning about traditional forms of healing, and listening to people's life stories. Ailya holds a BA in Religion and Islamic Studies from Swarthmore College and an MA in Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for this beautiful invitation. I am truly humbled and honored to be with your community tonight, and I pray that our mutual learning will bring goodness and blessing to all of our hearts and souls. Thank you for this beautiful program that you have created for the community. I'm really inspired to see that every night of Ramadan you have a different person speaking, and I imagine this took a lot to coordinate, so may it continue to bring blessing and knowledge and inspiration spiritually for the community. So I wanted to speak tonight, I'm just going to pull up some notes here. I wanted to speak tonight about spiritual seclusion and the lifelong journey of our hearts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'll speak for a little bit, and then I would love for us to have a conversation. I also wanted to see if you all would be open to a little bit of practice together. This is something I'm still learning and coming into, but if you all are open to a little bit of practice, if we have some time at the end, we could try that too. So feel free to let me know either through speaking or through the chat at some point. So in Ramadan, we empty ourselves of food and drink. And in doing this, we often find that we empty ourselves of so much more. After a few days of abstaining from our basic human needs during the day, we often find ourselves less and less consumed by the material world and more aware of and connected to our inner selves. We can be emptied of the stress and anxiety that are normally a part of our everyday. And sometimes we even feel like we're floating, or that everything else that normally weighs down upon us has floated away. We are less attached to the dunya, to the world, and we have greater perspective of what is real and what is truly essential and important in our lives. As believers, somewhere at the top of our list will be our worship and connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thus, in emptying ourselves of the world and our attachments through fasting, we create space for the things that nourish our souls. We create space for the words of the Quran, for deep reflection, for more present worship, and for constant remembrance of Allah in the core of our being. And in this moment of social isolation, Allah has given us the opportunity to further disconnect from the dunya and to connect to Him in a more solitary and intimate way. Although we do not get to experience the sweetness of worship in congregation, and I know it's something many of us look forward to each Ramadan, so there's a sadness in that, but perhaps we are being given a different sweetness in the beautiful experience of being with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone in our worship, or with just a few close loved ones and with Him Most High. The Islamic tradition teaches us that there are wonderful benefits in going inwards and taking time away from the distractions of our world. The Arabic term for this practice of solitude and retreating from the world to spend time alone with Allah is called khalwa. Similarly, I know many of you know that we have the practice of i'tikaf in the masjid the last 10 days of Ramadan, where we're removed from the world and are connecting to Him in very intentional and as much as possible time in worship. According to psychologist Dr. Marwa Asser, as human beings, we are wired for connection. Our hearts are designed to long to connect, and our heart's nourishment comes from being connected to all that is good. But ultimately, as we know, the heart's greatest nourishment and fulfillment comes from satisfying its longing through connecting to its creator. This is the fitra, our primordial or natural way of being. In the Quran, we are told that our souls bore witness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's lordship in our pre-eternal existence, in which Allah gathered all the souls together and He said, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And we, all the souls, responded, Bala shahidna, indeed, we bear witness. And then we were all, over time, we were brought to this world to fulfill this witness through worship, deep contemplation, and connection. But we live in a world that is constantly in motion. Our commitments sometimes leave us barely enough time to complete our prayers, let alone with time to reflect. We are constantly surrounded by noise, whether physical, psychological, or through social media. And there is never natural pause in the day to just be, unless we are able to go against the grain and create it for ourselves. Alhamdulillah, the prayers give us this naturally, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in the midst of that noise, we can be overtaken and consumed by the world, so much so that we start to become more and more disconnected from this longing within our hearts for Allah. Our prayers can become out of obligation rather than out of love and connection, and we can find ourselves spiritually more distant, even if we are fulfilling our daily worship. According to Dr. Asser, it's not until we can disconnect from the noise of the external world and settle into the discomfort of the solitude, quietness, and stillness that Allah opens the heart to receive what it needs, what it has been longing for all along. And it takes us time, right? When we're disconnecting, there is that initial discomfort because we're used to being in a world that's constantly going, we're constantly moving. Even if I'm sitting, I'm on my phone, I'm checking something online. So to really pull ourselves out of that constant movement and to be still, does take some time. And yet, once we are able to do that, the illumination can come. We have many examples of the prophets who experienced this illumination and transformation through their time in solitude. Imam Tariq mentioned that Imam Hamza Abdul Malik gave a wonderful talk on this just recently. So let's reflect maybe just for a moment on the example of Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam. We know that he often retreated to the cave of Hira before he received the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even after the revelation, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam spent much time in reflection, contemplation, and prayer, both at the cave of Hira and in the late hours of the night, connecting with Allah. He, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, would experience a great sweetness in the intimacy of connecting with his Lord in the last hours of the night with no one else around. We know in a couple of surahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even calls out to him in this state, beginning of Surah Al-Muzammil, Surah Al-Mudaththir. These moments in the middle of the night carry so much barakah or blessing, and it is in these moments of solitude that we can connect most deeply to Allah. The Prophet ﷺ said, our Lord descends to the lowest heaven in the last third of every night, and He says, who is calling upon me that I may answer him? Who is asking from me that I may give him? Who is seeking my forgiveness that I may forgive him? Thus, we have the opportunity for this intimate moment alone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He descends even closer to us and looks for those who are calling out to Him. Such worship also brings great humility and sincerity as we are prostrating ourselves before Allah, whispering prayers, confessing our grief, raising our aspirations, and asking for fulfillment of our needs completely alone with Him and with no one else around to see. According to a fellow chaplain at Williams, Imam Sharif Rosen, these moments are expressions of cosmic surrender that allow us to lay down any barriers between ourselves and the divine without and the sacred within. In these moments, it is not our minds that speak, but rather our hearts. And although we, of course, conceive of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the mind, we begin to truly know and connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the center of our being, which is the heart. So I want to talk about the heart for a few minutes. There are over 130 references in the Quran to the heart and numerous prophetic sayings. In one, the Prophet ﷺ says, "Indeed, there is a piece of flesh in the body. When that stays right, the whole body remains right. And when that goes astray, the whole body goes astray. That is the heart." Thus, the heart is at the center, and everything else is affected by its well-being. The Islamic tradition conceives of human beings as holistic beings. So our minds, bodies, and souls are interconnected, and when one is suffering, the others are suffering as well, especially when it's the heart. In another tradition, in a hadith Qudsi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says through the Prophet ﷺ, "Neither my heavens nor my earth encompass me, but the heart of my believing servant does encompass me." I'm going to say that again. "Neither my heavens nor my earth encompass me, but the heart of my believing servant does encompass me." This is such a beautiful testament to the great gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given humanity as his khulafa, or representatives on the earth. And in that place of being a representative, of course, we carry great responsibility. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that he breathes of his own spirit, of his ruh, into each human being. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. This spirit is what gives us life, and it is what returns us to Allah after our death. The heart is the container of this spirit, and ultimately the locus for our connection to Allah. In the Islamic tradition, the heart is at the center of our being on all the different levels of our existence, both the corporeal and emotive, as well as the intellectual and spiritual. It is the isthmus between this world and the next, between the visible and invisible worlds, between the human realm and the realm of the spirit. It is the locus for the breath of Allah, known as An-Nafas ar-Rahman, or the breath of the All-Merciful that gave us life. This is where Allah's ruh, or spirit, resides, where his names are manifested within each of us. The Prophet ﷺ has said that the heart of the person of faith is the throne of the All-Compassionate. The heart of the person of faith is the throne of the All-Compassionate. Thus, this is where Allah resides within each of us, and it is through the heart that we connect to and draw near to Allah. But how do we begin to connect to this heart, and through it to connect more deeply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In order to connect within, we must first learn to recognize Allah and his presence around us. In Surah Fussilat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, "We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth." Thus we can learn to see Allah and his signs in the world around us. It is said that Allah's names and qualities are reflected on the earth and in all of his creation. For example, the mountains reflect his majesty, the oceans his infinitude and mercy, lightning reflects his destructive power, and a lotus flower can reflect his beauty. Human beings also reflect these qualities. For example, a mother's love for her child is a reflection of, and even a vessel for, Allah's love and compassion for creation. Recognizing Allah and his creation can be a way of beginning to see him, to connect to him, and to know him. Just like the salat that brings us back to the remembrance of Allah 5 times a day, right? We spoke about how we're dissipated during the day. The salat becomes this time for us to constantly come back. It engenders that remembrance when we're in a state of forgetfulness. So like that, we can also learn to reconnect to and remember Allah throughout the day by learning to see his signs in the world around us. Then perhaps rather than needing to detach from the world, we're focused instead on attaching to Allah. We learn to see Allah in the world around us, and it all becomes a reminder of him. We learn to be, as Sayyidina Isa said, in the world, but not of it. We walk in the world, but we're not consumed or overtaken by it. As the Prophet ﷺ said, we live in the world as a stranger or a traveler. And this is the goal of the human existence. In Surah Ad-Dariyat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, "I did not create the jinn and humankind except to worship me." And in a hadith Qudsi, Allah says, "I was a hidden treasure and I love to be known, so I created creation so that I would be known." So we were created to worship Allah, to be aware of his existence, and to know him. And yet, as many of you know, the Arabic word for human beings, insan, comes from the root word nesia, which means to forget. Thus, as human beings, part of our nature is to be forgetful of Allah. Then the ultimate goal of human existence is, as we reflected, to remember Allah, to actually bring that remembrance back to our hearts, to overcome our forgetfulness, to worship Him, to connect to Him and His revelation, the Quran, and to love Him Most High. And we do this through our daily salah, through reciting and reflecting upon the Quran, through our dua and calling upon Allah humbly for our smallest and our greatest needs, through our gratitude for Him for all the blessings He has given us, through our dhikr or remembrance of Him, and through contemplation, as the Quran says, of His signs on the horizon and within ourselves. So I want to spend just a few minutes on contemplation before we speak with one another more. The Prophet ﷺ once said that an hour of reflection is more praiseworthy than 7 years of worship, revealing the importance of contemplation as an act of worship in itself and the significance of knowledge of Allah. As a side note for me, this also carries the reminder that we need to have presence within our prayers to raise them to even a higher rank, right? But what really is contemplation? There's a beautiful series this Ramadan, I don't know if any of you have seen it, on contemplation by Dr. Abdullah Rahman. He's one of the foremost scholars in the field of Islamic psychology, or understanding the science of the soul, ilm al-nafs, from an Islamic perspective. It's hosted by the Cambridge Muslim College and is on YouTube for free with other lecture series if anyone's interested. But anyway, in this series, he speaks about tafakkur, or contemplation. He relays that in contemplation, our goal is to be present with Allah, to be present with His oneness, and in a state of witnessing that He is our Lord. And Allah can put us into a state of presence, but we can also do things to cultivate coming into this presence through tafakkur, or contemplation. In Surah Ali Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Those who remember Allah while standing or sitting or lying on their sides and contemplate the creation of the heavens and the earth, saying, 'O Lord, you did not create this aimlessly.'" This contemplation is often translated as to give thought, and yet it is much more than this, because the Quran speaks about the heart being the mechanism through which we perceive. Dr. Rothman tells us that 18th century scholar Ibn Ajiba defines tafakkur as the journeying of the heart to the presence of the Lord. The journeying of the heart to the presence of the Lord. Thus, it is an inward part of our spiritual journey that can draw us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By contemplating Allah's names and qualities, the beauty of His creation, and our own connection to Him, our hearts open more fully and journey to Allah. And the spiritual quality and presence that's gained from this can penetrate our other worship and all the other parts of our lives. As we learn to be present in contemplation and shut out the cares of the world and the chatter of the mind, we can learn to be more present in our prayers, and we can learn to be more aware of Allah's presence around us and His blessings and mercy in our lives. Oh, thank you for sending that. Our consciousness can open more fully to wisdom and to truth, and we can be awakened to seeing things as they truly are. The Prophet ﷺ used to make this dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow him to see things as they truly are. Through a contemplative practice rooted in the Islamic tradition, we can then train ourselves to live from a heart-centered form of consciousness and being. This all said, I don't mean that we should all become ascetics, of course. Islam is the middle path. But I hope that these reflections and teachings from various teachers can help us build a practice of contemplation and reflection, whether that's journaling or quietness and stillness, prayer, that can bring presence to the rest of our worship and day, so that we're always drawing near to Allah on our lifelong journey to Him. In this moment of social isolation and during Ramadan, perhaps Allah is giving us the opportunity to cultivate our heart's intellect and to detach ourselves from the world and to connect with Him in the deepest way. Inshallah, over the course of this month, we can do just this. I'm going to just close with the dua, and then I wanted to see if you all are open to some practice together. Allahumma, please open our hearts and make them sincere in their worship of You. Connect us to Your word, the majestic Quran. Help us be present in our worship. Help us build knowledge of You and Your creation so that we may draw near. Allahumma, shower Your blessings and mercy upon us and our families and our loved ones and our communities. Accept our worship. Forgive our wrongdoings, and draw us closer with each day and each moment of this month. Allahumma, lift the trial that we face around us. Bring safety and healing to all, especially the most vulnerable, and help us learn all that we need to from this time on our journey to you. Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam, tabarakatul jalali wal ikram. O Allah, you are peace, and from you emanates all peace, and to you peace returns. Enliven us, our Lord, with peace, and enter us into the abode of peace. Blessed are you, O possessor of majesty and honor. So I'd love to hear from you all for a few minutes. See if you wanted to first reflect on what I've already shared, or if you wanted to try some practice together. So yeah, please jump in.
Yeah, that was very insightful. Very insightful. I think sometimes our students are a little shy on the chat, but if we can, what did you have in mind for practice? That might be someone kind of loosen us up a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a muraqabah. So I'm still kind of learning these things as I'm going along, but it's a muraqabah practice, which is a little bit different from the it's contemplative, but not quite what I was describing. So it's muraqabah is, kind of taking stock of ourselves and our day. And so we'll do a little tiny bit of recitation, and then think of 7 things in our lives that we want to ask forgiveness for, 7 blessings that we've been given, 7 needs, and just kind of picture Allah's light and blessing in our moment and in our lives. That's something people might want to try out for a couple minutes. Feel free to throw something in the chat. Okay, I see a yes. All right, let's give it a shot. All right, let's see, I'll type what we need to. Oh, thank you. Okay, perfect. So before we begin the muraqabah, we want to establish the presence of Allah in our mind and heart. Before that, let's just take a couple of deep breaths. And just remove whatever is around us, the cares of the world, our studies, all the things that we might be holding in this moment. So we'll take a deep breath in and breathe out. A deep breath in and breathe out. A deep breath in and breathe out. So again, we want to establish the presence of Allah in our minds and our hearts. So reflecting that Allah is with me, Allah is seeing me, Allah is hearing me. So again, Allah is with me, Allah is seeing me, Allah is hearing me. We'll hold that for a moment. And now we can recite. I'll say them all first and then give you a moment to recite. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim once. Astaghfirullah 3 times. Durood Sharif or any blessing upon the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam 3 times. And La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah 3 times. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim 1 time. Astaghfirullah 3 times. Durood or salawat 3 times. And La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah 3 times. right. Now, if your eyes are not already closed, close your eyes and imagine the name Allah is bright in the skies. Light is spreading everywhere and is touching your head as well. And through your head, the light is entering your body and it reaches your heart. And your heart starts to recite, Allah, Allah, Allah. Imagine that everything in the universe is doing dhikr of Allah as well. So this light is emanating from the sky, into your home, into your body, into your being, into your heart. And your heart is reciting Allah. Your heart is remembering Him. Now we'll do the muraqabah. So you can think of, it can be 7 things or really whatever comes to your mind and heart. So think of a few things that you want to ask Allah for forgiveness for. Missteps, misunderstandings, wrongdoings, whatever it is that you want to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness for and release to Him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that when we ask for forgiveness, He grants us that. So inshallah we can put it in His hands and release it from our hearts and our souls. So think of 7 things that we want to ask for forgiveness. Then remember 7 blessings that He has given us, 7 things for which we want to be thankful or grateful. And then lastly, 7 things that we want to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, needs or difficulties or things that we're facing in our lives. So forgiveness for 7 things that we may have done wrong, gratitude for 7 blessings that we have in our life, and 7, again, or however many needs or difficulties that we want to ask Him. Again, whenever we do this, we can release what we're carrying within us and give it to Allah, who really is the one who can hold all of these things. We feel the need to hold everything and to control things, but really Allah is the one who can hold everything. All we have to do is give it to Him. We'll take some time for that. Okay, now imagine that you're in a different place, perhaps a place that you've been to before. Our souls can be anywhere. We just have to learn to connect to that. whether you've been to the Rawda of the Prophet ﷺ, or the Kaaba, or a special place, or a special prayer that you had in your life, whose sweetness and blessing you remember and want to reconnect to, or a moment you were in nature and felt close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever it is that was a special moment for you, imagine that you're in that place for a moment and hold and recollect the blessing and the sweetness and the beauty of that time. Okay, now recite salawat or a durood and start to come back into this moment and this place. And then we can gently open our eyes and reconnect, and I'd love to hear from you all. So this is only my second time ever doing this. I did this with my own community this week, and we reflected a little bit on what that was like for individuals. So if you feel comfortable sharing, I would love to hear how it was for you, or what you're thinking about or reflecting on from the time that we've had today. Or even any questions you have, or something that you want to share, or even about your Ramadan so far. I'd love to just connect to you as a community in some way. So I'd love to hear even something special about this Ramadan for you.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay. I just want to say thank you so much for this talk. I feel like the topic was really fitting for this time. And I think during the practice, for me, it was just really nice kind of to have a lot of like silence and kind of like reflect on things. And I think even in quarantine, like I thought my Ramadan would be a lot of like alone time and a lot of time to reflect, which it has been, but I feel like nothing's the same as just like sitting in a moment and just really thinking about like a specific like idea or like a just like remembrance of Allah. So I think that was really powerful for me.
Thank you for sharing. I'm so glad to hear that. And you're right, because even in quarantine, right, things are still busy. We're still connecting to people in some way, doing things, and we don't actually ever make time to just be or to reflect on something. Like I think our society tells us that we're not supposed to do that because we're not being productive, right? But I feel like when I do this, and I only learned this practice, a little over a month ago, it just kind of brings like a stillness and a peace, which I feel like I was hearing you saying as well. And that I feel like that can just be really special because it brings like a calm to our hearts. We often talk about the ways that we take care of our mental health, and I feel like this is a way that we can do that as well. And it's a way that's rooted in our own tradition too. So I feel like that makes it extra special. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else that wanted to share anything?
Again, assalamu alaikum. Thank you. As Mace said, I don't know. I think in some ways it was very cathartic, and I think it was very peaceful. But I think in some ways it was also almost painful, but in a good way. I think there are things not intentionally maybe that I like was avoiding thinking about or like pushing away, but I think like with like how quickly, even in quarantine, you know, like I know a lot of us are like with our families now and are trying to do schoolwork, or if you are a professional trying to keep up with your job, it's not like the world has stopped, and there's still a lot that we're kind of forcing ourselves to do. And I think like just having that time to just be, to do nothing except think and feel the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like I think brought out maybe a lot of things that maybe I had been avoiding thinking of, not consciously, but I think there was almost sort of like a very painful realization of like things that I should ask forgiveness for. I think it was very clarifying. I think it definitely helped me see what I actually, in my heart of hearts, like wanted to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, and like more than sort of the, you know, generic like, oh, you know, protect everyone and like everything, even though those du'as are important. I think it definitely was clarifying about like what I truly like feel sorry for and what I truly want at this time.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know this sharing is, you know, makes everyone kind of open and a little bit vulnerable with each other. So I really appreciate your being willing to share. And that was incredibly beautiful, because we all do that, right? Like we all avoid thinking about things without even knowing that we're doing it, because we want to protect ourselves, even from ourselves in some ways, right? Because having to think about something puts us in a really difficult and vulnerable situation. And as human beings, we don't want to be in that, right? We avoid that at all costs. And yet, I know in my own life, when I avoid things, they keep coming back up, right? And because eventually something will emerge, and whether it shows up in the body or in the mind or in the psyche, we remember, like our bodies also remember. They carry an imprint of things. And so when we create the space to just put it forward and let it be and just give it to Allah even more often, we can release whatever it is that we're carrying within ourselves, and trust that Allah will hold it for us. And inshallah, He will forgive us for whatever mistakes that we've made, or will fulfill whatever needs that we have. And like you said, the world hasn't stopped, right? We're still going at somewhat full speed, even if not at full speed. And so, and we're not told to do nothing, or just to be, or to feel the presence of Allah, to have that kind of intimate moment. And I'm finding that when I do make space for a practice like this, and again, for me, it's very new, to be honest. So I appreciate you're all being willing to jump in with me in it. But when we do create space for something like this, it's almost like we can be subversive to the world, you know, and make it something that brings peace to us. Like it can be something that's a regular practice, you know, after Isha every night, or first thing in the morning, where we just clear our hearts. And then the things that we're carrying don't have to be like such big things, because we can just let them go and let them be, and bring just like a peacefulness and a calm. And like you said, feel the presence of Allah, because that's something that, you know, we say we want to do. Like I know I say I want to feel the presence of Allah, but it often requires that stopping, right? That being almost uncomfortable. And then over time, I think the discomfort won't be so intense, but that being uncomfortable in the silence, but then finding peace in the silence as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. It was just such a beautiful reflection. Anything that anyone wanted to share or ask about or connect about or anything like that? The practice is called muraqabah. And I could send, I can send like a copy of how to do this particular practice to Imam Tariq. And that way he could share it with anyone that's interested.
Assalamu alaikum. I do appreciate that. I didn't want to chime in because I didn't want to take any time away from anyone else. But I just wanted to say that this is very heart healing. And for me, it took me to I studied abroad in Damascus, Syria, and this practice was done every Fajr, after Maghrib, after Isha, and to the point where like there would be people from Salatul Fajr, like I think Fajr, I'd go upstairs, do my studies, come back. And when I came back down, it'd be like a whole other set of people. They'd still be doing this practice, and they would go, and it was just odd for a while, but once I experienced it, I definitely, this took me back to that place where I did feel stillness and emptying the heart of things that are burdening it, and also feeling the presence of the light of Allah. So this was it was a very welcome memory, which is, this was new with you. It reminded me of something very special. So I really do appreciate you sharing that with us today.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's beautiful to hear. I mean, even the story you shared of your time in Damascus and the ways that people would be doing muraqabah for such a long period of time, and the depth of the connection they experienced and that you experienced, the peace that you experienced in that time is so deeply inspiring to me. And actually, if there's a particular practice that you did, I would love to learn of it as well, if it's different from this. But it's inspiring to hear of that, and it makes me want to integrate this into my own life more. And so thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. What you did was very much very similar. There's some slight variations, but it's very similar. So I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give another minute or two if anyone else has anything else they want to share. How can we remember Allah through our world, dunya obligations? Oh, that's such a good question. And I think rather than deen being separate, that's an amazing question. And it's like the question, right? So how can we remember Allah through our world, dunya obligations, rather than deen being separate? And I think that's kind of exactly, I think in your question, you actually gave us the answer, right? You don't want deen to be separate. You want it to be everything. So a couple of different things. One is, what we were talking about, of being able to see Allah in the world, right? So that we're not just having to detach from the world fully, because that can feel like this disparate, weird dichotomy. But really that Allah, we're able to see Him in everything around us, in nature, in the qualities of human beings, and the virtues, because ultimately even all virtues, right, they belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we borrow those qualities in our lives. So everything can remind us of Him. The other thing is intention, right? We know innamal a'malu binniyat, right? That intentions are all by, or actions are all by intentions. So we can make intention for every action that we're doing to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to something that's related to Him, right? So even in my schoolwork, it can be for the sake of Allah. It doesn't have to just be for a worldly gain. We know the Prophet ﷺ would do everything with ihsan, with excellence. So even our act of doing things to the best of our ability with excellence can be done in remembrance of and living out the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So intention, doing things excellently, bringing intention of Allah into everything we do, and that changes the nature of everything that we do as well, right? Because if suddenly everything is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it brings a different barakah, it brings a different presence. I'm not just going to the grocery store because I need to go to the grocery store, but I'm going to the grocery store to feed myself or to feed my family because my body is an amana and I want to take care of it, right? Something like that changes the whole quality and the nature of what we're doing, so that we don't have to, like, as you're saying, feel this like separateness or being pulled in different directions. But ultimately, everything that we do can be almost a form of worship. My dad used to say, when he cooks for us during Ramadan, that this is my ibadah in this moment when I'm cooking for my family, And so with intention, everything can be a form of worship for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's helpful. It's a really, really good and important question. And I feel like it's a lifelong journey. The question, and we over time, we draw near, right? It's not like tomorrow I'm going to remember Allah all the time. Inshallah, every day is a little bit more, but it's a journey. We go through ups, we go through downs. In Arabic, it's qabd or bast. We go through contraction and expansion, and different moments will bring different things. So we never need to, feel bad if one day is harder than another. But inshallah, over the course of the journey of our lives, we draw closer and closer to Allah. And this takes time, but it's a beautiful and blessed journey if we can be conscious of it. What inspired you to do or study muraqabah? So actually, for me, it was learning about the heart, and I wanted to learn ways to connect more deeply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I would find that my worship was rote or just like through obligation because I knew it was something I was supposed to do, but I wasn't being present in it enough. Imam Tariq said, our work can be our worship if our intention is pure. Exactly, subhanAllah, exactly. But for me, I was finding that, I wasn't present enough. I didn't feel like that heart connection. And the prayers were an important part of my life. Alhamdulillah, it was, something that was really important in my home. But I wasn't experiencing something more from it. I feel like I was just doing it because I had to. And I wanted to be able to connect more deeply. And so I think that's what took me to kind of studying the inner dimensions of Islam. We're really getting to learn about the heart and the kinds of modes that we have in prayer, and still a work in progress. It's still continued study, the kind of khushu or humility and the kind of presence that we can have in our prayers. So I think for me, it brings more meaning. There's a saying of this, maybe she's 12th century, this Sufi saint named Rabi al-Basri. She would say, I wish, she would carry a pail of water and a stick of fire, and she would say, I wish that I could burn the fires of paradise or burn the gardens of paradise and quench the fires of hell, so that people would worship for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that people would worship out of love. And that's what I felt like. I knew in my head that I wanted to love Allah, but I wanted that to penetrate my heart. And so I think that's what took me towards this kind of study. And the muraqabah practice just recently came into my life, alhamdulillah, through a teacher. And it's something that, especially after being with all of you and hearing all these reactions and my own, something I hope will be a more regular part of my own life. And I hope, inshallah, is something that you are finding benefit in as well. Thank you for the great questions. Any other last questions or comments or anything that anybody wanted to share?
So I'm getting a question here that says, could you let us know of the Imam who has worked on YouTube regarding bringing Allah into our hearts?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So the question that I received says, could you let us know of the Imam or scholar who has worked on YouTube regarding bringing Allah into our hearts?
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Abdullah Rahman, I'm just sending his name. And did you send the series already, Imam Tariq? I think you sent the Cambridge Muslim College. I wonder if I have the series open on my computer at the moment. I could send the series. I do, okay. I love listening to it. Okay, I'm gonna send the most recent one in the chat. I think there was one today. I haven't looked at it yet. And he also has a website that's something along the lines of Shifa Counseling, and he has a blog on that website that has different podcasts and things that he's participated in, some writings and reflections. He speaks, Dr. Abdullah Rahman, he speaks a lot about coming into a heartfulness. So, often we speak about mindfulness, but he speaks about coming into a heartfulness, because we don't really want to be just stuck in our minds. We want to be present in the consciousness of our hearts, right? We want to experience the world through the consciousness of our hearts and experience connection to Allah through the consciousness of our hearts. So I hope, inshallah, you'll find that beneficial. It's been a favorite for me. And, I think these past days, you all have been reflecting on the different blessings and challengings of the pandemic. But I think a blessing has been connection to things that maybe perhaps we wouldn't have had connection to without, the time that Allah has brought in this way. I think even, being with you all tonight is a blessing that comes through challenge. And I think that's something that we can always continue to reflect on in our lives, that even through the challenges, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can bring blessing, can bring learning. Sometimes it's through our greatest trials that we transform the most deeply and draw close to Allah, because we're in a great state of need, and it's that need, that state of need and humility that's so pure that can open our hearts and allow us to connect to Allah in a whole different way, or bring a deep learning that we couldn't have experienced otherwise. And so, alhamdulillah, getting to hold both the challenge of a trial and the blessing, and never asking for trials, right? We never ask for them, but Allah always brings what we need, and even through a trial, trusting in that, inshallah. But yes, that's the information in the chat there. Any other last questions or reflections or anything that anyone wanted to share? Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, you're very welcome, alhamdulillah. I'm glad it's well received. Alhamdulillah, my prayer was for it to be beneficial, so alhamdulillah, I'm glad that that's the case. Alhamdulillah, if there's any good, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so alhamdulillah. Wa iyyakum, alhamdulillah.
Chaplain Vajid, well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for this insightful talk. I think it's been amazing. This Ramadan program really was a result of our other programs pretty much being canceled by the pandemic and emergency leaving from campus and everything being in limbo, and really yearning for something. And with the students, the board, the current board and the incoming board work together to put something together and kind of nudge me to really put some things together. And you and other luminaries like yourself who come here to share the light this month, Ramadan, have been very special. And there's been a theme, I think, that Allah has given us in this month. It seems like all the talks seem to intertwine and reflect in your heartfulness as something that I think is very, very much something we've been echoing. I think one of our speakers told us that the Quran was revealed upon the heart of our Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. So that is something that take away in the muraqabah. Thank you so much. I want to see if where is Maheen still here? Maheen, if you have any message from the board or anything you'd like to say on behalf of JHUMA, please share with our speaker today.
Yes, thank you so much for being here today. I can say as a part of JHUMA that we all appreciate the talks that we have been getting, especially yours. Like I felt, especially after today, after fasting today, I really needed like a break, and this really let me reflect upon my own, what I am looking forward to in the future, what I want from this Ramadan. So it really inspired me, and I definitely will be continuing the practice of muraqabah, and I'm sure other people will too. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. It's been such a joy and pleasure and blessing to connect with you all. Your questions and engagement have been so insightful and meaningful and reflective. And you can tell that, mashallah, so many of you are already in this heart place, and that's really inspiring to see. So thank you for sharing that with me and for sharing your presence, and for this just beautiful invitation, and get to be a part of this beautiful program that you all have created, mashallah.
Well, yeah, okay. So if there are no further questions, I know we have a certain amount of your time. I don't want to abuse that and go over. I would say if anyone has any last comments or questions, so please share them now. Otherwise, we will let our esteemed chaplain leave us the next time. Thank you so much for your contribution to our community. Thanks for being a part of our Ramadan program at Johns Hopkins University Muslim Association. May Allah reward you abundantly for your sacrifice and your effort in preparing this and sharing from your heart today. Thank you so much. Ramadan Mubarak.
Ramadan Kareem.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you. Jazakallah khair.